And good afternoon, everyone. Coming at you from Techntonic Lounge. This is Serge, the Code Engine Studio customer advocate. And today, my guest is Karishma, who's joining us from, I believe, somewhere near Mumbai. Yep.
Correct.
Thank you for joining the show. So, Karishma, tell me a little bit more, tell our listeners a little bit more about your career. What kind of things have you been into? What has been your specialization?
Okay, sure. So I started my career over a decade ago. It's close to 15 years now. And started with just a pure play love for the internet. Was the kid when dial up networking was a thing. And my parents would be like, "Who wants to get us on the internet?" And my hands up went up, and I would wait for that little connection and help them get on. And used to from there went to chat rooms and email, and fast forward into college when social media as a word didn't exist, but MySpace and Hi-Fi was a big thing in the US, and in India they were trying to do something like that for college campuses pan India. And I was just recruited by a friend, and I was like, "Oh my god, I'm going to get paid to be on the internet. That sounds fantastic. That's like a dream." So that's how I stumbled unknowingly and knowingly into this career. Didn't know it was going to get so big. After college, got into one of the first user generated content websites in India, where it was a number one website where brands would interact with consumers and consumers got to interact with brands. Fell in love with the whole universe of brands and advertising. And from there, they say it's history, but basically, I took that knowledge and I was able to expand it because I handled Middle East and APAC as countries in advertising agencies. Moved to Vietnam briefly, and then from there, I moved to Singapore. But essentially, it was to build the business vertical of digital. Normally, agencies, especially big agencies, would be seen as mainline and digital was a business vertical. So lived through that phase where we grew it as a business vertical to having it more as an integrated business unit where it started supporting, and we did a whole 360 of how does a brand live online and offline to where it is today, where everything is online and people basically live online. And it's been a fun journey because medium technologies could be the same, could be always evolving. But with that comes the whole nuances of culture, understanding people. And that's what really got me excited because, and made me move countries and give me those opportunities. So, yeah, it's more than just a job then. So, yeah,
It's a lifestyle, right? So,
exactly.
so you got to see the evolution of, let's say, the advertising and agency business from what you described as a more siloed approach to a more, I hate to use the word holistic, but let's just say holistic approach that digital is a part of everything that, I remember talking to folks in early 2000s about, well, digital is like 10% of what we do. We focus on everything else first. And I don't think any advertising agency or mainstream advertiser today would dare say that digital is only 10% of what they do. They would not be surviving long, right?
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. I mean, earlier it was always TVC first and digital came as the, background singers. And now it's like, how do we get to our users the first, the best possible way? The whole concept of personalization at scale, where earlier you just have an out of home and you don't know who's reading it, how many footfalls. You just know there's a lot of footfalls going there, but you don't know who that person is reading, what is their lifestyle. And now you can even niche down to the demographics, psychographics of the person, their interests, and actually customize. So we have evolved, but the scalability is there and you're able to actually track the information as well.
Do you ever feel like there is too much data to track that people get lost in the depth of trying to drill down to a single user or something
Yeah,
almost
I think
ridiculous?
they are like rabbit holes. I come from the creative communication side more than the media because agencies are divided into creatives as well as media. And media always goes with numbers and goes with the formula, while the creatives go like, it's just understanding person, it's understanding an idea. And it's very hard to justify. So there's always a constant tension because it's almost like using AI today, right? Where AI can tell you things, but does it have the nuance of understanding a person, an emotion, a feeling? So we kind of walk a tightrope between, data that is science and art, which is the creative side of storytelling and communication. So, Yeah,
Yeah, this is why I was very pleased to see that the actual demand in business is back to humanities side of things. Um, so I'll tie that together to what you said earlier, and I kind of want to dive into this topic a little bit more. You talked about learning about cultures and people and processes. So obviously, you've worked in offices in Southeast Asia and Singapore and in Budapest and other places. I'm guessing slightly different cultures. You've also worked with distributed teams. Um, you've also managed teams that are distributed and come from different cultures. Help our listeners understand some of the challenges that come, not just geography challenges, the obvious one is time zones and all these other things, but perhaps that's lesser challenge that most people think. But what are the challenges as far as working with a manager team that's distributed? And then let's dig in a little bit more about how do you actually set up processes to make it better?
sure, sure. I mean, the first thing, of course, distribution gets in, like, as much as you think you're borderless with the internet, there are still constraints. Time zones is one of the biggest ones. Knowing people, like, everyone says work from home, everyone says flexibility, but how much does that encroach into a person's private space and all of that? But the most interesting trend I saw with moving from Asia to Europe, for example, was just something as simple as communication. And you think you're in an English speaking place, but you understand the difference between people who are speaking English first, like native English, to even someone who's learned a local language and then is speaking English, because they're thinking one and they're translating another.
Yep.
And it's something I will never take for granted again, where you assume that everyone speaks and thinks the same way, but the wiring of the way you think in your local language and the way it translates may not necessarily um, be exactly an apples to apples from someone who is grown up or is very proficient with the language. So that was a big learning. But apart from that, just understanding where someone's coming from, understanding nuances in terms of culture. Like Asia is a very group culture. They want to do things together. They also are extremely, like, they will bend backwards. There is no boundaries are a thing that is a little interesting. Whereas in the Europe or in North America, they're very direct. They'll basically tell you if it can be done, if it can't be done, and they also do also kind of on the more ambitious overworking side. Europe has a more work-life balance. There is an understanding of humanity and, like, you shouldn't be like um, a going beyond a particular time frame or going beyond a particular, like, there are clearer boundaries in terms of work and life balance. So those things would be nuances to the person. In terms of technology, there's always a little bit of a gap. Like, you send an email or something, you have to understand there's a 12-hour gap. There's an understanding of workload as well. So while being in Budapest made me more strategic in terms of time, Singapore would make me work, like, I had to match New York time. So that meant midnight working hours and things, just because you had to get four or five people on the same time zone to talk. In Budapest, there was a balance because it was the in between North America and Asia. But then again, you have to figure that sweet spot. There was an understanding where you're like, okay, my first half in the day is kind of a little bit less, but by the second half, it will pick up because my clients wake up. It's 8 a.m. there, it's 2 p.m. here. How do we make that manage? And how do we still front load the work? Like, at the end of the day, we keep the work ready. So Asia, who's going to be like waking up late, earlier the next day, is able to take it and run with it. So it's almost like a relay race where you're passing a baton on and you're trying to make sure that the ball doesn't get dropped. So, yeah.
So it's interesting, you pointed out as far as growing up with the language, a lot of us are not native English speakers, but have done decently well with the language. But it's interesting that even folks who grew up, let's say Australia versus UK versus US, who are native, they also think differently within the language. And there's little cultural norms that are unexpected when you work. We've had clients in all three of those countries. And I've noticed at times, okay, I can't talk to you like an American. You're from Australia. I have to, find some differentiators when I do this. Um, you've also encountered some different generational things. So I'm guessing you're firmly a millennial.
Yes.
Um, I'm a Gen Xer, which is, we get along just fine. And
Yeah.
you've probably had a chance to work with boomers and Gen Xers, millennials, and some Gen Zs along the way. Um, how has this remote work and distributed work been impacted by the generational differences? I mean, obviously, if you're Gen Z, you grew up native digitally, right? So to you, all these things are expectation. But there's lots of other things that come into place when working as a team when it comes to generational differences.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. I think at the start, it for everyone, it's a mindset shift, right? So you're talking about a Gen Xer who possibly is on a more senior level or a managerial level, and for them, it's unthinkable because you had to show up for work. There was camaraderie meant at work. There was culture built at work. There was this understanding that everyone's working and in it together, and it's just a big mindset shift. It's like just understanding that, hey, this can still be exported remotely. There might have to be a balance, there might have to be a change, but there also has to be an understanding that we can never go back to pre-COVID. This has happened and now we have to evolve from there. There's not going to be like, or you're not going to be exactly back to square one. There is an evolution that's taken place, and we actually have to move and embrace it in a particular way. Now, it's not 100%. I know some companies have taken very polarized views of, like, back to the office or completely remote. It again depends on the industry and what they're looking at. Millennials, it's an interesting thing because there's been a balance. Like some millennials who have gotten married, have a family and kids, have embraced it because they're suddenly realizing that there is a flexibility with them trying to even, be better parents, can go up and down, can spend time in the office. Um, it was just something that is new and not expected, but welcome with that age group. Some of them find it overwhelming. Again, it depends on the structure of the family, the location you're in. Some parts of Asia where they live with extended families, it was getting too claustrophobic. So going back to office was welcome.
Hmm.
So it's a little more case to case. With Gen Zers, again, they've lived online most of their life. They think that having just a laptop and internet can get work done anywhere. However, they are far more balanced, where they will draw the line and they will maybe say, we're not going beyond these hours because we have a life. I think that's where the millennials get kind of sandwiched because it's like you have that old way of thinking in a way where it's like, hey, the work has to be done. So I will put in the nights and I will do whatever's needed to get through. But I can also work from home. So at times, if the mindset is that way, then you're not able to draw a boundary and then you could lead to burnout. But case to case, but these are more broad strokes of understanding where people's headspace is at.
So having all these challenges in front of you, you're managing a team. Let's talk about, we're a tech company, right? So we've worked with clients all over the world. We've worked. Still remember having to get on a call with the designer in Berlin and the project owner in Hawaii and somebody else in the mainstream U.S. So it was 1 a.m. call time. I remember that challenge. I remember how much not fun it was. But let's talk about technology and talk about what are the processes and systems and what tools. Not just talking about software, but to keep things flowing, like you said, not dropping the ball, and also not burning people out in this pretty fast-paced environment you lived in or you live in.
Sure. I saw like people embrace technology more to bring in this balance after COVID, because before COVID, it was still like people were burning out or getting tired, but no one's really communicating. Um, the whole concept of even having that one day for mental health, all of that kicked in after COVID, which was a good thing. In terms of tools, we've had Monday.com that just puts a list of, work tasks, and there's an assignment to people. So it's fairly clear who has to do what, and there's an accountability mentioned. We've worked with tools right from Slack, Teams, whatever works with making the communication going. At times, it's been interesting because you have the big agency that is subscribed to one tool, a smaller team subscribed to another, and then you're like on 4 or 5 channels, which is like we're basically saying the same thing, but you're just jumping across channels. So, I mean, that's your online version of just running from one meeting room to another when it's the same meeting. So, those are interesting challenges. I think what I found interesting was doing workshops online because we've had clients in North America, we're sitting out of Europe, we've had teams in the Middle East coming in for calls. So, like 2 or 3 markets, 2 or 3 time zones, different how, even locations when you're in the city itself. And having interactive tools like Figma or Miro and being able to, innovate with each other. And that, I think that true spirit of collaboration was able to translate. You have to have a really good moderator who can read the room, who can read people. You have to have more interactive sessions where people can't really doze off. They have to put in their sticky notes up there. Um, Having a live timer helps people get more, like, having time bound tasks. And literally, there's a lot of front loading in terms of work. Like, you have to think through everything. Like, if it's going to be a 2 hour or a 3 hour session, you have to think and flesh out the details. But once you're in the, also you choose, right? Earlier, when you used to have workshops, you could just have fillers in, like people just coming in to participate, but not really, like more like spectators rather than participate. But here it's almost like, hey, if you're in that call, you better show up and add value, or don't be there. And there are limited numbers with some calls, there are things, but everyone feels that need to be involved and do something about it. So I found that very refreshing. um,
It's very interesting when I think about getting multicultural opinions. When I was working in New York City years ago, it was exciting because it was the city that brought people from other parts of the world, but you still had a limited set of voices. They had to physically be there and walk into that office in Rockefeller Center, and they had to be available there. And maybe you can get on a conference call, but there was nothing interactive about it. What I feel like you're achieving now with these calls, despite the challenges that you face, is you are expanding to a broader range of voices that can give you opinions. So if you have a client in US is running a campaign in the Middle East, you can get live Middle Eastern opinions without having to rely on the Middle Easterner who moved to New York or Chicago or whatever 10 years earlier and may not be up to date or on the ground, have underground knowledge. So I think that's quite interesting. Um, when you and I talked earlier, you mentioned the idea of just having to readjust the way you think about things like sprints and processes and just organizing the systems along the way, not just software, because it's a multicultural and a multi generational team, multi location team. Can you dig in a little bit into that?
Sure. I mean, there was one as simple as we were developing a product for North America. We were in Europe. Our tech team was based in the Middle East as well as India. And for some reason, not to call out a market or anything, but there was a difference in terms of the ways of working. So um, most of us were cued into the modern sprint sessions. The other teams that we were working with had no clue what a sprint session was. They were only doing waterfalls, which would actually kind of invade the time bound sensitivity of the project. So it was very interesting. One was to basically try and educate them and see how we can make this work. So sometimes it's about even workshopping and telling them, what is this new innovation? Where's our headspace at? What's the new ways of working? The second thing is also trying to find a middle ground, because there are constraints and barriers. Like, if someone's only doing waterfall and they have no idea of sprints, they just don't know how to react. They don't know how to put it at the back burner. The project manager would have to create more stories so that you can actually create priority ones, priority two. So they can at least have an output without feeling that overwhelm and burnout, because there's constant feedback compared to, making everything and then getting a feedback. So it's a bit of a learning curve, especially since you're getting 2 or 3 teams, 2 or 3 markets, different mindsets, and then you are trying to get everyone aligned on the same page. Um, I think having weekly connects, and sometimes even twice a week, like bi-weekly connects, was extremely crucial, because it's better to have people constantly in touch and talking than people going silent for a few days or weeks and then coming back and saying, "Oh, I did not understand what you mean, so I did not do anything about it," which can cause a lot of friction and just delays, unnecessary delays. So I think, again, communication, while technology is a very good facilitator, at the crux of it, communication and openness is extremely important during such matters. And especially when it's time sensitive projects, it gets even more critical.
Yeah, I think being on the same page about the systems you're going to use. Some projects can work Kanban, waterfall. Some projects can work
Yeah.
Scrum, but you have to understand and make sure that every part of your team, wherever they're geographically located, is aligned not only on what you're doing, but I think in today's world, it matters on why you're doing it, right? Why do you choose certain systems? So if you are a company in North America, you're choosing to work with offshore partner, whether it's multi-location or single location, or even a team of offshore partners that are distributed. We have a client that has partners in at least 4 countries that I can think of. So we have to align with the head office in London, but they're working with folks in 4 other countries. What I can say is there has to be a way to set the cadence of communication, like you mentioned, weekly, biweekly, semi-weekly, whatever makes sense. But there's also has to be understanding of why we do certain things, why we put in certain systems, and there has to be a feedback loop that is both clear, but it's also not overwhelming that you're not just doing meetings for the sake of meetings and the right people, as you said earlier. One of the earlier episodes that is coming out soon, one of the phrases that I absolutely fell in love with, and I'm hoping to make a poster one day, is clarity is kindness. And I thought
Yeah.
that's a great line that I am picking up for myself, stealing from our guest on that show. And that idea to me is sometimes it's better to take the time and make it clear and say, okay, let's make sure that we're working together in the same direction, that we're pulling in the same direction, that we're not, slowing each other down, or we're not going around in a circle because, we are misaligned. Okay.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
No, so to your question, you're spot on. I think we obviously have discounted things like even alignment on the kind of project tools you're using, the kind of communication tools. Like, is it Slack? Is it Teams? What tool are you using? What kind of software are you using? Where is it going to actually be stored? Everything, and basically after that alignment to take it from there. With this bi-weekly thing, we just came to the conclusion because we used to do weekly connects and we realized we used to do technical and creatives both in the same, and it was getting too much because the technical people felt it was absolutely useless for them being there. You're doing creative communication of how what are you saying on the website matters. So that's another set, and that's why we decided to actually create two separate connects so that you can only focus on that particular critical task at hand and get it moving so that you can get the ball rolling in a more smoother fashion. So yeah.
Yeah, that's powerful to be able to just focus on the particular group of people. You're still not in a silo. You still know what the other part of the team is doing, but you're focusing. So if I am on the technical side and you're on the creative side, we're still communicating, but I don't need to sit through your alignment while you don't need to sit through mine, hypothetically.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we mentioned working offshore, and you used the term that I want to kind of dive into in a previous conversation, the idea of democratizing work. Tell me what you mean by that, and then we'll kind of dive in even deeper.
Yeah, sure. I mean, one of the things that we touched on was like you talking about how millennials and Gen Zs have approached this particular change, right? And it's getting more and more obvious that, at least in our industry, if you have a laptop and you have internet, you can basically function as a worker anywhere. And what you do with the power of the internet is changing, right? From the Web 2.0 as it's going to Web 3.0, there is more power being given to the person more than the corporation to do whatever they feel. So it could be right from, hey, I want to be a content creator, or again, it's not only you're silos into one box, like I was hired to do this role. It is I can be this and this and this. So today you have doctors who are content creators as well as coming out with their own product line for skincare example. You have the list is endless. So I've seen that with doctors. I've seen that with psychologists. Pop psychology is becoming a thing where you're getting more accessible information with what you should do for mental health. Um, so that's basically what I meant when like the opportunities are endless. You could be an influencer, you could be a digital nomad creating product, and that one person product could actually scale and sell across the globe. I mean, a classic example of a indie hacker, they call it indie hackers, is actually Peter Levels was one of the big ones back in the day. He builds in the open, and he does a lot of that. I don't know if you've seen the new influencer trend. It was a big thing during the Cannes festival, at least from India, where you had a bunch of content creators from different fields, right? From finance or from some of them who were on the entertainment side, but just people taking their passions and making it out there. So Cannes is known for their films as well as for their fashion. And there was a 23-year-old girl from a small town in India, like a tier 2 city. And she decided to she was invited for Cannes. And her entire page and her content is basically stitching her own clothes from scratch. So she sees something, she gets inspired, and she stitches it herself. So she said, if I'm going to Cannes, I should extend what I anyway do online to this, to the red carpet. And she stitched her own dress, and she made actually I would say global history in that sense, because you're talking about a tier two city person who doesn't speak English, who's had no backing, in terms of corporation or funds or resources, and just because of her skill, she's got that avenue as well as platform to have a voice. So that was really interesting. We're seeing people trade goats online in, I mean, from India and anywhere else. So you have like an Instagram page where people are just showing the kind of goats that they have to sell to other people who are interested. And basically, you're getting these tools are given to you, and you are getting creative to do what you can to monetize, to make your life better, to get your message out. And it's what you do with it that makes it interesting more than anything else. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm excited and nervous at the same time when I hear this, because I'm excited because we don't have to be bound to influencers like the Kardashians, though sadly they still have a large following, because the Hollywood propped whatever had to be have their own reality show, and that's how you become an influencer. So we've expanded beyond being force fed quote unquote influencers. We have a lot more variety. On the other hand, there are two concerns that I have within that. One being that the accuracy and quality information is often not clear. Let's just put it
Yeah.
nicely, diminished in many ways. And so I think there's a greater need for critical thinking. And I think it's important, especially when we're dealing with teams that are collaborating, that we don't just absorb the information, but we critically analyze and decide what to bring in. Even, I would say if you're marketing and you want to use an influencer in your campaign, don't just grab somebody who's hot, analyze somebody who's bringing value, who's doing more than just being popular for the sake of popular. The
Yeah.
other concern I have is I feel like, and I'm excited to hear what you say as far as people are doing multitasking or multiple paths, because I've heard way too many young people say that their goal is to become an influencer. And I think that there's an off balance, whereas too many influencers and not enough audience would be kind of my concern there. And I am hoping that we have less noise and more actual information being put out that is worth having discussions over, that we're learning how to talk with each other. And I think this works for professional. I mean, this is why we're doing this webcast, is to be able to, in our very small niche audience, have a bit of a voice and be able to share this information, but also to be able to invite people who may not be on prominent, they're not CEOs, CFOs, CTOs of major companies, but they have ideas that they want to share, and they have ideas that they believe bring value to others. Um, so going with that, you mentioned tools, right? We talked about the way people use social media, even if they're not native English speakers, even if they're not in mainstream. Do you see a general trend globally to people changing the way they rely on social media, or is it becoming a ubiquitous thing where we basically have to have Instagram, TikTok, whatever, and everything else built around that? How do you see that going?
Those are those are like around two, three questions put together. So let's try tackling them one by one. I think the first one was a fair concern where you're becoming famous for the sake of famous, and that's also a thing with these social celebrities, right? A lot of them garner a following, and then people are not vetting the credibility, but they're just like, oh, they're famous for the sake of being famous, so let's add them. What we would basically do in marketing is try to map the brand's value or what the brand stands for with the kind of value the consumers, the influencers bringing, or the content creator. It's going more into a content creation space because that term influencer is getting redundant in that sense. And I hope it does, because at the end of the day, a content creator is building value and in their niche space. So if you're a doctor or if you're a fitness enthusiast and or a yoga instructor and you're teaching yoga, so it depends on the genre or the category you're trying to reach and add value to. This gets me to the second thing of how the internet's evolved, right? So Web 1.0 was basically you went on the internet and you consumed content, which was just you read. Web 2.0 was you go onto the internet, there are these massive platforms, but there's a bit of an engagement where you can read as well as you can write. So you could go and purchase, but it was still just a two-way communication where the corporations or the content was way more than the person, and the consumption was way more, but the creation was way less from an individual. And this is where Web 3.0, which we're moving to, is democratizing everything, where you can not only read and write, but there's an ownership from where you are. So essentially, I'm hoping when you're saying the ownership, in the sense, at some point, like if it's say crypto or something, at some point I could give someone a token if I'm a content
Hmm.
creator and add value, and we can have a relationship. So there's no middleman like Google or Facebook or something coming in, because it's directly my relationship with you. And that's where you're adding value and how you're adding value comes into play. Because at some point, as much as we blame the algorithms and all, I would like to believe people aren't stupid or as naive, and they would obviously like to see some value or see something to back. So that's where my hope is when the whole democratization of content and what we're doing out there happens. Um, so yeah, did I miss anything
No, you're
else?
good. I'll end with my. This is my last question for our conversation today. So I want to put you in an advisory chair. You're going to be on the board of a fictional company that has, whether it's a physical or digital product, and they're trying to build it out. You know, and they have not had a plan at all. Do they need to build a website? Do they need to set up e-commerce? Do they need to start with social and push people over? They're overwhelmed, right? If you have something that has been selling at a niche level at a local market, but you believe it has potential of getting bigger, right? And let's say it's a physical, tangible good, not necessarily just a digital product per se. Um, how would you even walk them through the decision process? I'm not saying this is the steps you must take, but how would you walk them through as a marketing advisor, as a online advisor, person with experience with brand building and everything else? How would you walk them through whether they have backing or not? How to make the decision where to go technologically, where to go marketing wise?
Sure. I mean, that's a very good question. It's something that at times even brands forget, because they're going after business and profitability or whatever. And it's something when there's an entire department and an arm in advertising, which is basically planning and strategy. And the crux of the planning and strategy person or the strategist is to give the voice and a point of view of the consumer. So, as much as, at the end of the day, the client servicing or the person handling the business with the clients, the person who's doing the creative is thinking of the brand in mind, the strategist comes with a point of view of what's the reality out there in terms of the current market, what's the competition doing. And at the end of the day, is who is your consumer? Who is that person whose life you're actually changing? And when you realize what is their pain points, where does the brand actually fit into their pain point? Where are they consuming content? Where are they making that buying decision? Like, we there is an exercise we do, which is basically doing a consumer experience journey, where we map right from where does this possibility of the person even thinking about your brand or needing your brand come through. I mean, a very good example would be, there was a brand which was basically for, it was a burn ointment, and they wanted to go out there, and they were basically trying to do a route which was more like a cosmetic route, where they're like, oh, we'll be everywhere and we'll just tell people to buy us. And it didn't make sense. I mean, yes, you could spend some for being awareness and top of mind, but that at the end of the day, only when a person's burnt will they actively look for you. Your intent is high when you're actually in pain or you actually need a solution, because it's something you're not actively looking for unless you're in trouble. And that itself would create an entire journey and an experience where your intent is so high, so you're actively searching for it. And because of that, where can you get the best information and credible information that's actually going to help put your product out there as the answer to the user's problem? So I would basically say, who is your consumer and what are you trying to solve for them? And then take it from there based on whatever insights we get, data, qualitative surveys, asking consumers on ground, whatever it might be for the client who's really comfortable with it, and taking that information, understanding that person, and then building that product around that, the situation or the person from there. So, yeah.
Yeah, as a technologist, I would add to that and say, yeah, make sure you're selling to where your people are and you're not investing your resources just because that's how it was done before, right? I have talked multiple potential customers out of building completely custom online project where I said, look, people don't need to come to your website to get this, right? They can do it through a shopping portal. They can do it through social media, whatever it may be. And I think that that needs to continue to evolve as the platforms change. And I think there's also a difference, and that's a whole other conversation that if we want to get into another day, is the consumption is going to change with generations and geography. We're tying it back to where we started. Is
Yeah.
the way folks we worked on a project in the Philippines, and it had to be mobile first because you have several hundred islands, maybe over 1,000 islands in the Philippines, and
Thousand.
mobile is very much a requirement. You can't rely on having you know wired connection and so on and so forth. So you had to be relied on that. At the same time, you in the U.S. people shop differently than they do in India and so on and so forth. And so well, I will end the conversation here because I think we can keep going for another hour and talk about all these topics that um, perhaps one day we'll get on a call with a potential customer and get it as a webcast and allow them to tell us their problems and solve it both technologically and from a marketing perspective. But
Sure.
for
I'd
today,
love that.
yeah, Karishma, thank you very much for being our guest on Tectonic Lounge. For listeners and viewers, please tune in. We'll have more episodes coming every week on our YouTube channel. We've also recently launched our shorts and reels on Instagram and TikTok as well. So little small takeaways that will feed your curiosity along the way.
Sure.
Have a
Thanks
good
for
day.
having me, Serge. Thank
You
you.
bet.